If you could please, so if you could please join me in silent meditations, can you put your feet squarely on the floor, relax your shoulders, and sit erect, please? Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namadats, 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 namadats. I always love after silent meditation, we always have people that join us. So welcome. We're going to be doing the Junirai tonight. So if you could please open your PDF to the chant. As many of you know that we have chanted this before. And what I like to do is I like to chant it a little bit quicker or a little bit faster than the standard BCA beat. Now, for those that might not be familiar, is that our head temple in Kyoto, which is the Hongan-ji-ha, which is the Nishi or the Western temple, there are liturgy experts, and what they do is they train the ministers on what is the proper etiquette for chanting. And so right now, as I've mentioned to the minister's assistants, which I'll talk about later, I had a great opportunity of being at Ekoji this last weekend in person and seeing Eric and everybody. It was really nice, is that there is the standard that they teach. However, it varies. So I went through Tokudo over 20 years ago, and what I was taught was a different speed than what they're taught now. So today what I'm going to do is I'd like us to chant a little bit faster because I do believe that you get a little bit of a different feeling. So if you can look at the Junirai, so if you could see the first line, we usually go, Kenshu Tennin Shokugyo. So what I'd like us to do is a little faster. I'd like us to go, Kenshu Tennin Shokugyo. Not too much faster, but just a little bit faster, okay? So if everybody could please join me. Genshu Tennin Shokugyo Amida Senryo Zokuson Zai Mimyu Andako Muryo Bushu Shuinyu Konjiki Shinjo Nyosen no Shama Tagyo Nyozobu Yomoku Jonyaku Shorenge Koga Chorai みだそん。面前炎上女満月。以降有女千日月。少女見空しら。子が将来みらそん。观音頂戴观中寿。修寿妙相法将言。老木下道魔教満。子が将来みらそん。無備無苦交渉業。習得強血女国。小差利益特自在。子が将来みらそん。実法妙門菩薩衆。無料小魔上三段。一生修上願力中。子が将来みだそん。本体保険知書系。前後症状明大座。おひざ上女線の。子が将来みだそん。実法将来勝負し。権限人図深夜なく。戦後草原上苦行。子が将来みだそん。小無常無我と。薬女水月伝よろ。一種説法無名字。子が将来みだそん。一尊仏説無悪名。薬無女に悪道夫。主任死神拒否尊。子が将来みだそん。一尊無料法勉強。無少種悪知識。往生不体死菩提。子が将来みだそん。画説非尊功徳寺。修善無変。如海水。小逆前言。小乗者。摂取上小彦。ナマンダム。ナマンダム。ナマンダム。ナマンダム。ナマンダム。ナマンダム。 何にしく読平等正祭同壺大神往生あなと。Namadots, namadots, 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 namadots. So good evening, everyone. Nice to see that we have a few more people that have joined us. As we mentioned earlier, it's getting closer to New Year, so there's going to be less and less of us. And then hopefully in the new year, we'll all be refreshed and come back for our Wednesday evening sessions. For those that have just come on, I apologize. It's been a very busy day. We are having the bishop from the Buddhist Churches of America coming to the Eastern District, going to Ekoji, to Seabrook, to New York, and then actually going to the Albany Sangha for the first time. And so I've been coordinating that until an hour ago. So I'm kind of not the sharpest tonight, so I apologize ahead of time. But tonight, what I'd like to do is I would like to have a more personal Dharma talk. As we've said a lot of times that even though the Buddhist teachings are very ancient, over 2,500 years old, they're relevant for our lives and meaningful to this day. And tonight, the subject matter is going to be the most important vow in Jodo Shinshu, which most of us are very well aware of, that Shinran Shonin chose the 18th vow. Now, we've had a discussion before about the technicalities of what a vow is and the story of Bodhisattva Dharmakara making these vows in order to have all sentient beings be able to reach nirvana. So I'm not going to focus on what is a vow and what the doctrinal origins of it is, but what I'd like to do is today talk about what is the 18th vow and how do you relate to that in your everyday life? And as anyone else, I come and go with my spiritual wisdom. A lot of times I'm on, on cruise control. And especially when I have all these different responsibilities, it's very easy to get lost in worrying about what my responsibilities are as opposed to, what is the Dharma itself. When we have our minister Fukens, we're all very human. And so we try to refresh our batteries as well. And I had the great opportunity of actually going to Ekoji in person this last weekend, and it definitely charged my batteries. And the reason I'd like to share this with you is because when I was going to Ekoji, I visited my brother. For those that aren't familiar, my brother lives in West Virginia, approximately 90 minutes from Ekoji. And so when I go to Ekoji, I try to spend a few days with my brother and his family, and then I go over and do my duties, so to speak, at Ekoji. And so this time, when I went to Ekoji, I went down on Saturday and I spent 4 hours, and that's not including dinner, with the minister's assistance. Was wonderful. It was so nice to see everybody in person and to give them encouragement and guidance on how they can work towards helping Ekoji. And again, all of us at Ekoji are looking towards the future and how we can better serve our Sangha both in person and virtually online. And it is a challenge. And I think that we are going to be having a retreat next week, which I mentioned before, where we're going to be talking about the future of Ekoji and how we're going to try to make materials and subject and things more accessible for people, and so they can hear the Dharma in whatever setting that they're in. So that said, so when I was going to, so I'm in family mode, and my nephew, I'm very proud, has really worked his way up. He's in the multimedia field, and he's actually done a documentary that they are nominating for award for his documentary. It's a very short documentary. So I was so proud of him, and that was on Friday night, and then I went to Koji on Saturday. And so then one of the things, again, talking about the Dharma, not trying to think of it just as obligations or what we're doing or in my role as a minister, is it was so peaceful to walk into Ekoji. So many of you are very well aware of that the temple and the board, especially, and poor Andrea, the president, just had all of these chaotic things happen in the last several months of the year, culminating with the flooding of the Hondo or the altar area with the brand new roof that was put on and people literally sucking up the water. And so I had this in the back of my mind, but when I walked into the temple grounds, it's like, it's just Ekoji. It's this warm, charming, comfortable place to go to. And all this trauma of what went on and what I knew that all the members had gone through, I walked into the Onaijin, I walked into the Hondo, and it was just calm and peaceful. And I reinforced that, that the idea of that having Ekoji, and we're very fortunate that we do have the physical building, which is gorgeous, that has had its imperfections, especially over the last year, but it's there to welcome us. And so I was there last time at Obondori, which was in the summer, and here I am coming in the fall, and it's always warming and welcoming. And it helped me reflect because it was nice to see the minister's assistants. I have not seen them in person since Obondori, and them asking questions and me explaining what's going on a national level with our Buddhist churches of America, and them asking questions about what should we do at Ekoji and different ways. And we had a lot of really interesting discussions. And one of the things that I like to brag about with Ekoji is that we do have a variance in ages. And right now we do have a youth group that is young adults from high school to early college. And we talked a lot about how to nurture that group with the Dharma and have them be part of the larger Sangha. So getting back, okay, so I go to Ekoji, and it's like, again, one of the things when I really appreciate as a minister is when you're a guest speaker. Now, I'm not a guest speaker at Ekoji, but it's been so long, sometimes it feels like that. So you walk into a temple, let's say I did a talk at San Fernando Valley last year, and you go in and you meet the new Sangha, you get to see their services, and you get to understand the Dharma, and you really do lose your mind of the role that you're playing as the minister, and you get to be part of the Sangha. And that was what happened. And so then when I was working on my Dharma talk for today, which is the 18th vow, it came across to me in a very different way, in a very personal way of how I related to what happened at Ekoji and how I've been viewing my personal circumstances, my personal life here with teaching the Dharma here at New York, Seabrook, and at Ekoji. So before I go into, we have gone into, as I said in the past, we've gone into details about what the vows are. And there are 48 of them made by Dhammakara, who would become Amida Buddha. But tonight we're focusing on the 18th vow, which was picked out by Honen Shonin, which was Shinran's master, as the most important vow. And what I'd like to do is I would like to read this vow to you. So if you could please join me in Gasho. If, when I attain Buddhahood, the sentient beings of the 10 quarters with sincere mind, entrusting themselves, aspiring to be born in my land, and saying my name perhaps even 10 times, should not be born there, may I not attain the supreme enlightenment. Excluded are those who commit the 5 grave offenses and those who slander the right Dharma. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. So I'm very familiar with this passage. For example, when my first 5 years of my ministry, I was at the Fresno Betsuin, and the Rinban Miyaji Sensei had us read this every Sunday and the Sunday service. So I had it memorized, as well as the Dharma School kids. But the wording is not necessarily as meaningful to me as it is when I experience in my life. So talking about today and going to Ekoji and looking at how the idea of what Shinran Shonin talked about, why the 18th vow is so important. And I will go into this because he talks about the 3 minds, which is very specific. And I'll talk about that after I give the example of my personal experience and why this idea of Shinran's view of the 3 minds really makes the 18th vow for me personally very relevant and very practical. As many of you know, in the last 16 months, my life has drastically changed. It was not just me moving from California in September, but like all of us, I think my life all of our lives drastically changed with the pandemic. At that time, I was taking a leave from the absence from the ministry And I was working for a nonprofit in Fresno, California, that was working with senior citizens, specifically from the Japanese American community. So I was working a lot with former members that I had at the Fresno Temple. And like the rest of us, all of a sudden we heard about this thing that was called COVID. And within 2 weeks, my program was completely shut down. And then I lost employment. And here, I've been very lucky. I was raised middle class. So, I have a college education. I've never lost a job before, and it was very eye-opening. And before I go into, what we all went through during the pandemic, it was very hard for me because a lot of and Brian Nagata. Okay, for those that know Brian Nagata, his mother Jane is an active member there, so I saw her on a daily basis. She teased me unmercifully on a daily basis, and then all of a sudden, seeing them go from socializing and playing bingo and going to the dinner hall together to them being isolated in their rooms was very hard to watch. We tried to do bingo, but then we could not do it sanitary. So then they were doing it in their room on Zoom. And for those members that the youngest age, I would say, is probably in their mid 70s up to 100, it was so hard for me to see them go through that. And unfortunately, we lost quite a few people because of COVID. So it was a double whammy. Not only did they go into isolation, but unfortunately, the facility had people that were about 10 people passed from COVID, including some of my Dharma friends from the Fresno Betsuin. So it was very hard. But then, like all of us, I went from that to nothing. And I think a lot of us, you saw people joking on TV, oh, I'll learn a foreign language, or I'll be focused. Or for me, it's like, I'm going to start studying my Japanese more. I'm going to start reading my Dharma in depth. And that pandemic took the juice out of a lot of us, I think. We had these great ideas. And then as the isolation continued, we became more despondent and self-centered and self-focused. And that's what happened to me. And then, unfortunately, my partner of 18 years at the very beginning of the pandemic had 3 small heart attacks, which made me instantly become a caregiver. And for those that have been a caregiver, I give you so much credit. And I think all at different levels have been a caregiver. But going from being self-focused from the pandemic, doing what I wanted to worrying about someone else, something as simple as nourishing the person and taking them to doctor's appointments. Many of us have been through this, but going through the focusing on someone else completely. And it was interesting because there were times, because I had my obutsudan in the living room, and there'd be days that I'd be so busy that I realized in the afternoon I hadn't even opened the obutsudan in the morning, not even to say a simple, Namo Amida Butsu, or to do a simple chant. And trying to keep that balance. And then, unfortunately, my partner's health deteriorated to the point where he passed last August, in August of 22. But what happened, and again, this is talking about thanks for Ekoji, is that the bishop reached out to me about 3 weeks before his passing and talked about the possibility of a virtual ministry. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that, talking about having the motivation, because I got accepted to the position. I started on September 1st, and 2 weeks after my partner had passed. And it was very, very difficult to be part of the Sangha that first few weeks, especially when I was giving Dharma talks. And the reason I'm bringing this up, and this is a personal Dharma message, is because was it me that was able to pull through and be able to do these Dharma talks? Was it me that was be able to focus with the Ekoji Sangha? No, it was something beyond that. And at that time, it was like, okay, my partner, one of the last things he said to me is, now you can teach the Dharma again, which was very exciting to me because that's what it is. But in our human mind, again, the idea of the role that, okay, here I am going to become Reverend Rai again. I have these obligations, I have these schedules, but that's not what, and looking at it as a career, obviously it's a career, but the idea of being engaged with the teachings again is something that went beyond me as an individual person. And I think that, when I focus on all of the people that I've known all these years in the BCA, all the way back to Seattle 30 years ago, and their perseverance, no matter what they went through, that's part of being a Sangha, right? Is that I've met so many people that lost loved ones, but then they persevered and they went on. And what was that? There was this calling. And again, when we get to the end of this talk, we're going to talk about the three minds that Shinran Shonin talks about, these different components that help us focus and go beyond our secular self, going beyond that I am Kurt, I am studying the Dharma, or I am Reverend Rai and I'm teaching you the Dharma. It goes beyond just this dualistic thing. It goes beyond our everyday experience. Now, for those that are fortunate enough to go through Tokudo, which is ordination, and Eric has gone through that, and Laverne Amore, actually, I pushed Laverne and Eric to go for Tokudo. They sometimes they don't forgive me about that, but I think in the long term they are happy. But one of the things that is that you can't prepare for is when you actually go through the ordination ceremony. So many of you have gone through the affirmation ceremony and have received a name. And again, we will be doing that at Ekoji this January when the bishop comes. But when you do it with ordination, it's very special. One of the things is that I mentioned before is that Shinran Shonin was given to the temple at 8 years old. And part of the story or part of the legend is that they said, well, we will have ordination for you tomorrow. And Shinran said, no, life is impermanent. Life is passing like cherries blossoms. I would like to be, and it's a beautiful poem that's attributed to this 8-year-old boy. And he says, I want to be ordained tonight. And so to this tradition, all these, over 700 years later, over 750 years later, we still need to go to Japan for ordination, and it's done in the evening. And so you have the Gomonshu coming up. And so here we were, maybe 30 of us non-Japanese and another 150 Japanese. So everything was in Japanese. And the Gomonshu said, and was translated, he goes, Tokudo is not the end. This is not the end point. It's the beginning point. Tokudo means that you are making the commitment that if you're at temple, you can no longer sit in the back row, that if there's something that needs to be done, that you cannot pass it off and go to lunch early, that, you have made this commitment for the teachings to go forward. And it was very meaningful for me. And like I said, with the idea of Shinran Shonin talking about the 18th vow and the three minds, this really became meaningful in my everyday life with how I view teaching the Dharma, because teaching the Dharma is not just simply giving facts. It's not simply a position. That the idea is that you are making the commitment, because our founder, our Gomonshu, goes back to the founder Shinran, which goes back to the time of Shakyamuni Buddha. So that means that all the monks and nuns for these centuries have made this commitment that I am going to continue teaching the Dharma. That is what I'm doing. And tonight, as we can see, our group is not our usual robust, 20, 25 people, and one of the things that we've always been taught is that if there's one person listening, then that is perfectly fine, because what you're doing is that you're sharing the Dharma. So getting to this idea for the three minds, again, Shinran Shonin looked at the Pure Land teachings and had his own vision or his own interpretation of them. So for those that have been exposed to like Chinese Pure Land Buddhism, if you go to one of their services, you're saying the Nembutsu, or they pronounce it Nenfo, and it's very rhythmic. So they will have a piece of wood and a cog, and they'll say Namadatsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Nanfo, Nenfo, Nenfo, and then they speed it up, and then you speed it up till it comes to this climax, kind of like how we hear the concho at the beginning of our services. The bell is not consistent. It goes louder, 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 and then goes down softer. And so they're saying the Nembutsu, and then you come up to this crescendo, and then you go down. And it's a very interesting view, because how many times you say the Nembutsu is important. Whereas our founder Shinran Shonin said that if you say it once, that's significant, which gives it a whole different type of idea that it's not a practice, that saying the Nembutsu is not a practice, it's a form of realization. So getting to these three minds, so Shinran, as we've mentioned before, his founder Honen Shonin picked 3 sutras, 3 holy texts, that is the main components of our founding of Pure Land Buddhism. In English, we call them the larger sutra, the smaller sutra, and then the last one is the contemplation sutra. And I know Ekoji folks love to read. I actually, a lot of the letters that I get is like, where can I get this book? Where can I do this? Actually, I got a request. What's the best version of the Pure Land Sutras for me to read? I love Ekoji, right? So I did the research and sent it on to this person this week. But you have to realize that Shinran was looking at these. And so when they talk about the three minds, those were taken from the Contemplation Sutra. Now, what does contemplation sound like? Contemplation is a meditation sutra. And if you do indeed read the sutra, from us, from a Jodo Shinshu perspective, it can be perhaps a little confusing because it actually tells you how to do a samadhi, how to do a visualization, that you look at the setting sun and the setting sun turns light. And it's walking you through an actual meditation. Now, Shinran would say, do we take this on face value or do we look at the deeper meaning? Provisional expedient means. So he says is that, what we do is we look at what the context is. So these three minds that they're talking about in the sutra, he puts in the context of the larger sutra. And so what he's saying is that, this idea of three minds is not a form or the end result of meditation or contemplation. It is something that we experience. And I'd like to share these three minds that Shinran explained. And I think let's go into not too much detail, but discuss them a little bit. So the first one is sincere mind. And this is something that we can open up for discussion. I know I always pick on poor Ken, but you're right below me in the picture, Ken, so I can see you. So, okay. And I missed you guys last week, and I know you weren't there, but I missed you guys. But the idea that, everybody can reach nirvana. However, when you think about it, for you to even know what nirvana is, for you to know who Amida Buddha is, to know what Buddhism is there has to be a first step, correct? And so the idea is that, when people say to me that, oh, so if someone is not, this is the question I used to ask my Christian grandmother. I said, well, what about if someone's living in the Brazilian rainforest and they've never heard of Christ before? Does that mean that they die and they have no ability to go to heaven or whatever? And she didn't like to answer that one because it was kind of a difficult question. For us who follow the Buddhist path, the idea is that if you are in the rainforest and you're not exposed to the Dharma, then maybe in another life you will come back and be able to be exposed to the teachings. But the first one is sincere mind. And the way that Shinran looked at this was it's a sincere mind, meaning a questioning mind. And so the idea is that when we approach the Buddhist teachings is that, and we're all skeptical. I mean, a lot of us we are very analytical, like, we look at this, doctrinally, academically, does this make sense? But again, the beginning of the path is that it's a sincere mind, that you are trying to understand the teachings in a way that is relevant to you, to give it a chance. As I've said before, one of the beautiful metaphors in Buddhism is they talk about when you encounter Buddhism that you're entering the stream. And as I've said before, it's beautiful because it's not the idea of that you're jumping in the deep end or the jumping in the ocean. You are entering the stream. And the idea is that you're sitting down and gently letting the current take you. So that is a sincere mind, that you are trying to understand the teachings in a way that's relevant to you and that you're trying to give it the opportunity to penetrate your mind. So number two, we've talked about this a lot, and that's entrusting. So first of all, you start with this sincere mind that you're opening yourself up to the teachings, but then you have this entrusting component. And this is where you can tell that the people that are from maybe other Pure Land traditions or from the Theravadan tradition, they're saying, well, you're taking a meditation sutra and now you're telling us to entrust. But if you, without going into great academic detail, so Shinran Shonin would look at kanji, and we do have some members at Ekoji that are from different traditions from Southeast Asia, and they've talked to me. It's like, oh, well, Shinran had a very interesting interpretation of these Chinese characters, and so Shinran took those characters and said, this is entrusting, which we've discussed before, as that we, when we say we entrust, we are putting our faith into it. It's not a blind faith. We are entrusting. We are making the cognizant step forward that we are entrusting. It's an action. We're not just listening, we're entrusting. That's a difference. And the last one is an interesting one that we don't talk about a lot, because we say that once we start the path of Shin Buddhism, we're all going to reach nirvana upon our physical death. But they're talking about the aspiration for birth. And I'd like us to talk about this, if possible, in the discussion group, because I find this fascinating. So we've got the three minds, which is sincere mind, the entrusting mind, and then the extra one is the aspiration for birth. And what does that mean? So that means that we're looking at the Buddhist teachings, not only how they interact with our daily lives, but we are looking at it in the larger context of our lifespan. That when we say aspiration for birth, we're talking about getting out of the cycle of birth and death and going on to nirvana, which is guaranteed to us by Shinran's teachings. But here he's focusing that that's one of the three minds. So we have to have a sincere mind, we have to have an entrusting mind, and then an aspiration for birth. And so again, we can talk about that in the discussion, what does that mean in aspiration for birth and how far does that go? And is that practice? I'd love for us to discuss that. So today I want to thank everybody, and I'd like to thank Ekoji for giving me this nice break from coming from New York. It's like, oh, look at, there's not a million people on every street corner, and oh, look at, I can go, there's a regular grocery store. But it was nice to go to Ekoji to see my Dharma friends and to be able to reach out and see the Sangha, and for us to work on how we can better serve our Sangha both in person and digitally. So I'd like to conclude with the 18th vow, if you could please join me in Gasho. If, when I attain Buddhahood, the sentient beings of the 10 quarters, with sincere mind, entrusting themselves, aspiring to be born in my land, and saying my name perhaps even 10 times, should not be born there, may I not attain the supreme enlightenment. Excluded are those who commit the 5 grave offenses and those who slander the right Dharma. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. So if everybody could please join me in the group reading today, we are going to be reading the Creed 2, which is on page 4 of the PDF. So if you could find that, please. Okay, the Creed 2. Casting off the self-power mind of the varied practices and disciplines, we entrust ourselves single-mindedly to Amida Tathagata to save us in regard to the one great matter of birth. With one thought moment of entrusting, we know that we are saved and that our birth is settled. After this, we say the name in joy and gratitude, repaying the Buddha's graciousness. We acknowledge gratefully that we're able to hear and understand this teaching because of the benevolence of our master having appeared in this world and the successors in the transmission, the good teachers whose words were not shallow. Beyond this, we all observe the established rules of conduct throughout our lives. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namadatsu. All right. So if we can conclude with a short silent meditation, and then we will go into our discussion. So if you could please join me in silent meditation for a few moments. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namadatsu.